Greens put ideas into action on school boards, land and water boards, planning boards, city councils, and various commissions. Vote Pacific Green in this election and register Pacific Green to support green values every day, not just on election day. Vote and register Pacific Green for Oregon's future. And now, we get to hear from the candidates directly. Our first candidate is our candidate for the 3rd Congressional District, Michael Mayo. Michael Mayo taught for 25 years as a teacher in public schools. He served 2 years in federal penitentiary for refusing the draft during the Vietnam War. He worked as a truck lumper, an electronics technician, and as a translator for Russian and English. And Michael is also an author of a study of the history of abstract algebra and is now adjunct professor of mathematics at Portland State University. Give it up for Michael Mayo, 3rd District.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are here in the middle of an election campaign, in the middle of a war. The war was started by the United States. The war is intended to enforce American supremacy in the Middle East. We therefore have to confront the fact that we are members of an empire. This empire is an American empire, and it cannot be sustained. It is a simple truth that empires fall. This one of which we are members will soon fall. As a matter of fact, if we look at the results from the stock market in the last 2 weeks, there can be no doubt in anybody's mind. As a matter of fact, in the last week, the results of what has happened on the New York Stock Exchange leave us in no doubt that the empire of which we are a member cannot be sustained. How can we, as intelligent people in the United States in the year 2008, how can we regard the fact of these extraordinary circumstances through which we are living? How can we handle what to do? In the first place, we want to look and see what happens to empires in the past, and see that we are no different from those other empires in the past. Let's take, if you will please allow me to do so, let's take the Roman Empire. In the Roman Empire, they had 2 Gracchi brothers who fought prior to the establishment of the empire for the Republic, the Roman Republic, to put into practice the social compact that would include the lowest levels of the members of the Republic. Both of those brothers, one 10 years after another, were assassinated by the Senate or the Senate's minions. What happened to the Gracchi brothers took the soul out of the Roman Republic. The empire grew large. The empire extended its dominions throughout the Mediterranean area. But when confronted with peoples who were no longer asking to be given the identity that the Roman Republic could give them, then the Roman Empire began to crumble. In our own country, we had a sense of our common destiny. We have an empire that is based on this idea that the constitutional legalisms, the constitutional protections, the constitutional dignity that we have in our country is worth spreading around the world. That's the basis on which we have decided to rearrange the Middle East, after all. We're going to give them the gift of American democracy. Well, in the United States, Martin Luther King was assassinated, Robert F. Kennedy was assassinated in 1968, and that has taken, as a result, a lot of the drive out of the American dream, of the American image of ourselves as a country, of a civilization that can make the world a better place. Now, when that happened, of course, it didn't stop the American Empire from getting ever bigger. The American Empire has sent its reach across the Pacific into Vietnam. The American Empire sent it across the Indian Ocean into the Persian Gulf. Yes, we're bigger, but now what do we stand for? We stand for enforcement of the writ of the White House by force and violence. No one is going to join the American Empire under those conditions. No one is going to help the Americans enforce their will around the world. It's just going to be the rest of the world against the United States. And the United States cannot sustain it. No country ever has been able to sustain forever an empire. So when we look here at the British Empire, we see that in their victory of World War II, Winston Churchill, the victor of the war, was turned out by the British. He was defeated in the next election. In order for the people of Britain to include their entire community in a single healthcare system, which he, Winston Churchill, the victor against the Germans, the one who suppressed the Nazi conspiracy to conquer the world and to kill all the Jews, Winston Churchill would never have agreed to health care for all. He was a reactionary politician of the Conservative Party. And the British turned him out. At the time of their very victory in the war, when their empire was no longer. Well, why was their empire no longer? Do you remember the beginning of World War II? Do you know what happened to the British? They were pasted by the Japanese. No longer could they rule in India. No longer could they rule in Africa. They had just been wiped off the map by the Japanese. The Japanese took Malaya. The Japanese bombed their best Prince Edward battleship into the ocean and put the British on the run throughout Asia. No longer were the British able to maintain an empire after their so-called victory in World War II. That is a possibility for us, ladies and gentlemen. If we can follow that example, we do not have to, like the Romans, insist upon going down with a ship. We can, like the British, turn and say we will not continue to have an empire that engulfs the world in a grasp of iron. We can turn our attention to all of our fellow citizens, and we can turn our resources to the prosperity of all of us. An empire, in the Roman case and in the British case, an empire will ignore the poor. An empire will treat the poor as not worth notice. And we have that today. We already have, here in Portland, people sleeping on the streets. What's going to happen with the oncoming economic conditions as a result of the crash of the stock market? I don't have to tell you. I'm not telling you something you don't already know. There's going to be a lot more homeless on the streets. There's going to be a lot more unemployed here in Portland. And is the Oregonian going to go up and tell us how terrible that is? Not at all. They'll be worried about the property owners. They'll be worried about the people who have a lot of money in the stock market and in their bank accounts. That's all they're going to worry about. I ask you as a fellow citizen, you can change and make a difference if you will change your attitude, if you will if you will bring into the topic of discussion all of the people of the United States, all of the people who are equal members of our community, including our possibilities and our abilities to work together. If we work together with everybody in the United States, now that the empire is in decline, we can make it into a republic that has a future. Thank you.
That was Michael Mayo, our candidate for 3rd Congressional District against Earl Blumenauer. Our next candidate is our U.S. House District 2 candidate, Tristan Mock. Tristan cares deeply about people. She spent the majority of her time as a naturopathic intern in low-cost and free clinics. Her training in gerontology makes her especially sensitive to the difficulties that people face as they age. The raiding of Social Security funds to pay for the invasion of Iraq is extremely disturbing to her. Tristan Mock lives in La Grande, Oregon, where she is a naturopathic physician at Golden Leaf Clinic and teaches at the Blue Mountain Academy for the Healing Arts. She spends her time with her daughter, attending peace vigils and the La Grande Farmers Market. tending to the community garden, and cycling. Tristan Mock.
Thanks everybody for showing up tonight. I know it's a little bit chilly, but I came out of snow to get here, so it's not that cold yet. So, we all know that we're here for peace. We're all fighting to get out of Iraq. Let's end this war. Let's stop the fighting. And I think we really need to keep up the protests that we have, the vigils, the rallies, all across just this town. I've seen there's several vigils, several rallies every week going on across the state. Where I'm out in LeGrand, there's a peace vigil in the middle of red territory. There we are every week, rain and snow since the beginning of the war. And across the nation there's vigils to end this war. And we need the presence. We need to remind people that we are out there. We're running for elected office, this peace slate, to remind people that we want to end the war. The Democrats got elected saying that they were going to get us out of Iraq, and then decided not to, and continued the course. So, besides the peace slate, as Seth said, I'm a naturopathic physician, so healthcare is an important issue to me. Michael mentioned this as well, that we really need universal healthcare in this country. It's ridiculous that we have people out here who can't get medical care, diabetics who can't afford to get insulin and are dying, losing limbs, all sorts of health conditions that just aren't covered. We need coverage. That people are losing their homes because they can't afford their medical care. And everybody needs to be taken care of. We need medical care. It's a basic human right according to the UN. Why don't we have it here? So, besides that, Social Security, we all need something to fall back on. It was set up, during the Great Depression. We need something to fall back on to have that security in our older age, or if we become disabled. And we're losing that. If we keep rating it, keep paying for these policies that we just can't afford and that keep losing us money, we can't continue. So we need to end that. So, I guess I'm going to wrap it up for now. Let's get it on.
That was Tristan Mock, 2nd District. Next up is our candidate for Oregon's 4th District for U.S. Congress, Mike Beilstein. Mike Beilstein is a retired chemist who worked at Oregon State University in nutrition and agricultural research for 30 years. He has 2 degrees from OSU in biochemistry in 1973 and human nutrition, a master's in '89. He was elected to the Corvallis City Council in 1998 and 2006. He will run simultaneously for Congress and his council seat in the November election. He was elected to the Corvallis City Council in 1998 as part of the Jobs with Justice local living wage campaign. When the council declined to enact the ordinance, he led the successful effort to enact it by initiative. Mike Beilstein, 4th Congressional District.
Thank you, Seth. I'm Mike Beilstein. I live in Corvallis. I'm running against Peter DeFazio in the 4th Congressional District. In Benton County in Corvallis, we have a fairly successful Green Party there. We have about 1.5% of the registered voters, while it's about 0.5% for the whole state. So we've got a good concentration of Greens. We have 2 elected Greens on the City Council, myself and George Grosh. We have 1 school district or school board member who is a member of the Green Party elected, and also a Soil and Water Conservation District director elected. So in Benton County we have 4 elected Greens, and I'd like to say a little bit about some of the things that we've been able to do there. Right now, because of fuel costs, I've heard places like Eugene are actually cutting back their transit service because they can't afford to run buses. In Corvallis, we are increasing transit because when people can't afford gasoline, they're going to be taking the buses and they'll need it. And so that's the sort of thing. We are going to save transit no matter what in Corvallis. If we have to raise taxes, if we have to create a surcharge on people's sewer bills to pay for it, we will get the money to pay for transit and make sure that we keep expanding it in Corvallis, because this is a time when people need it. Corvallis has a rating from the American Bicyclist or Guild of Bicyclists of gold rating. I learned early this summer Portland got a platinum rating. So Portland, and I'm proud of Portland for that. I think we have as good bicycle amenities in Corvallis as you do here. I think they were just prejudiced because they wanted to make it, they wanted to give it a big city, so they chose Portland rather than Corvallis. But I think we're right behind you in getting our platinum rating. As Seth mentioned in the introduction, I was first elected to this Corvallis City Council as part of a living wage campaign in Corvallis, organized through Jobs with Justice. I was the local chair, and I got on the council, and there are 9 councilors of our early planning sessions, our goal setting. I said, well, this is important to me. This is why I ran for city council. I want to do this. I'll do all the other stuff, the land use work, and making sure the buses and the sewer and water runs. But I'm in the council because I want a living wage ordinance in Corvallis that would set a floor that no city contracts would be let out to people who are paying less than that wage. And said that at the first goal-setting meeting. This was back in 98 or 99 when we took office, and I didn't get the support of a single other councilor. So I said, well, look, if you guys are not going to support this, I'm going to the people, and we're going to do it as an initiative. We did it as an initiative. We gathered 1,000 signatures, which was required to get it on the ballot there, and I probably gathered about 800 of those signatures. And the voters in Corvallis backed me up. And so I think that's an example of what the green influence in Corvallis, that we are concerned about workers' rights in Corvallis. We are concerned about the environment. We are concerned about having a sustainable community. One of the biggest green initiatives in Corvallis is a community sustainability project. This is to come up with a sustainability plan for our whole community. And this was initiated due to a lot of citizen input, but having 2 Greens on the council made it a lot more certain that the council would adopt it. And we are kind of at the end of a process of public input for the sustainability plan. The very first town hall meeting at which citizens would come to start working out the sustainability plan, we had 600 people, over 600 attend. This is in a town of 50,000, so you're talking about more than 1% of the population of Corvallis showed up to help create this sustainability plan. So there's a very strong public commitment to it. We want to do what's right to make sure that we have local access to food and transportation and housing and the energy requirements that we need. Now, we want to do that, and I think it's great that Corvallis has started on this initiative, and there are other cities which are also beginning sustainability initiatives. There are things like the global climate commitment, which in all the states on the West Coast, the governors of those states are committed to following the Kyoto protocols, whether or not the United States ever signs on or not. The governors in those 3 states, Washington, Oregon, and California, are committed to doing this, and they're not waiting for the United States, just as we didn't wait in Corvallis for the city council to decide that they were going to support a living wage. However, the sustainability project, as much as we do, we are hindered by one big problem, and that is that our economy in the United States, and Corvallis as well, and Portland, is based on a system of imperialism. It's based on a process of vampirization in which we suck up the resources of the world, bring them to the United States, and then they supply our needs. And I guess an example to illustrate this, if you look at the resource use by the poorest quintile, the poorest 20% of people on the earth, and compare that with the wealthiest 20%, and we in the United States are definitely in that wealthiest 20%. You compare the use of resources, we are using 34 times more resources than the poorest people of the world. Now, we're not able to do that just because all the poor people of the world got together and said, oh, we like the Americans, let's help them out. We'll give them everything we've got. We'll give them our copper ore, we'll give them our aluminum, we'll give them our oil, we'll give them our coal, we'll give them our sulfur. It's not like, we'll give them our forests, we'll give them our cheap labor. It's not like they all got together and said that. They can do that because we've got a military which goes around and removes governments which don't agree to the system of imperialism by which we steal from the rest of the world. So no matter how sustainable Corvallis wants to be, we're still living within an economy that is based on stealing enough stuff from the rest of the world that we're able to use a lot more than our share. And that system of imperialism is ultimately unstable. It's not sustainable. It's not something which the rest of the world is going to tolerate for long. In fact, signs are they're not tolerating right now. The dollar, the dollar is slipping relative to other currencies in the world. The price of petroleum is coming up to a real competitive cost because the Indians and the Chinese want to buy that petroleum too. And we're not getting it at bargain basement rates anymore like we were able to for a long time because we had a military which could go around and say that, you give it to us or we'll overthrow your government. As I think Iraq was the last attempt to do that. We can't support the military we have now. It's bankrupting our country. It's bankrupting our economy. It's taking resources away from those things we need to maintain the basic infrastructure here. So, although I'm on the Corvallis City Council and I work very hard on the issues of sustainability, ultimately I know that Corvallis or any other American city cannot be sustainable until there's a commitment on the part of the United States to move away from the economy based on imperialism. We have to realize that we are responsible for our own resources. We cannot steal from the rest of the world. We cannot impoverish the rest of the world to enrich ourselves and live a wonderful lifestyle here. And that's what has got to end. And I'm afraid that the Democratic Party, which, a lot of us admire Obama for various reasons, the Democratic Party is not in any way challenging the system of imperialism. And that's why it was important for the Greens in Oregon to run a congressional slate, a peace slate, every candidate committed to getting us out of Iraq and Afghanistan. Every candidate on our peace slate says if we are elected to Congress, we will not vote to support we won't vote for the supplemental spending bills which pay for the occupation of Iraq and Afghanistan. We will not vote for any increase in the military budget. And although that's the pledge, I'm sure most of us would be happy with a 50 to 90% cut in the military budget. The United States now has a military on which we spend more than the rest of the world's governments spend on their militaries together. We have not only the biggest military, we've got a military which is bigger than everybody else put together, not in numbers of soldiers, but in the amount of money we spend on technology, the sophistication of the weapons. So we're not just a big military power. We are pretty much the only real military power left on Earth. And the world tolerated this for a while, but we see some resurgence. We see resistance in Venezuela. We see resistance in the Soviet Union. We see resistance from the Chinese and the Indians. Things are not going to go on as it has. There's going to be an end to imperialism, and just what kind of end is that going to be? Are we going to be an impoverished country in which we have millions dying from poverty, from the diseases of poverty, and from homelessness and lack of health care? Or are we going to make the transition, as Michael has spoken, to a republic in which we have a commitment to take care of the people who live here? And that's a decision that we're coming to. We can't see any real leadership from the Democrats. Let's build a Green Party. So register Green, vote Green, and if we don't win this election, we'll be back. Thank you.
To take place and that I was going to participate. Let me say that I'm very busy filling out sometimes not too bright questionnaires from not too bright editorial boards of not too bright newspapers. But having been a lawyer for 35 years, I'm an expert in stupid questions. And so I'm glad to be here. Let me say that some of my quote liberal end quote and quote progressive end quote friends get very antsy when they learn that I was in the Navy for 26 years. But let me say that the men and women in the U.S. Navy, by and large, are just like you and me. They bleed red blood. They get hungry 3 times a day, more often. They are patriotic in a rational sense. You've always got a crazy right-wing minority in any organization from the Bank of America to the White House. So I did a good job. I was a criminal defense attorney. Oftentimes, the big brass would wish I would take a long walk on a short pier. I was an attorney for disabled servicemen. I was a casualty assistance calls officer, which meant that when there was a casualty, war or peacetime casualty, I would have to go out and kind of hold the hands of the next of kin and tell them that while things were very grim, I could help with a pension or health care card or that sort of thing. A number of retired military have come to Oregon and in the earlier years carried the flag for progressivism. One interesting man was General, you'll come to me just, somebody's Raiders, Carlson's Raiders. Carlson was a Marine Corps general who spent his time in the Pacific sending special force type troops into islands where Marines and others were held prisoner and brought them to safety. When he came to Oregon, he actually ran for the U.S. Senate in 1948 on the Progressive Party ticket. Through the history, we've had a lot of very brave men and women who have stood up for small d democracy and stood up for the best inclinations of our country. I was a registered socialist, am a registered socialist. All the time I was in the military. And I didn't get much flack, I got some. But any member of the NAACP and the ACLU and the Socialist Party would cause some high-placed brass to get nervous, and those people should be nervous. If I was the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, like Bush, I would be very nervous. I don't know where he's going to go after he retires, but he does have a former pig farm down in West Texas. It's called a ranch, but I don't think he has any cattle. And I hope he goes there and is very quiet, and we don't see any more of him. Okay, I'm running for Attorney General. I must confess that even though I've been an attorney in this state since 1980, when I was serving my 12 years in the Oregon State Senate, I really didn't know much about the Attorney General office, except the Attorney General defended all sorts of incompetent Oregon agencies and laws that were passed by, and I don't downgrade farmers serving in the legislature, but they don't know anything about constitutional law. Let me show you the sort of job that the poor Attorney General has got. Last December there was a decision by the Oregon Supreme Court. What was the case about? It was about a little child that 9.5 years earlier had been operated on up on the hill for a congestive heart problem. The child was 3 months old, and they cut off the oxygen, and basically the child went into invincible status. The total medical damages for that child was about $17 million. The statute passed by our ne'er-do-well legislature in 1991 said the maximum to give that child is $200,000. That's about 2% of the damages in this case. And the Supreme Court, the Attorney General was asked to defend that statute and defend the Oregon Health Sciences University. He did. He lost his shirt. The Supreme Court held unanimously that the statute was unconstitutional, and asked, of course, the state of Oregon, you and your taxes, to pay not only good millions of dollars to the kinfolk of this child, but to pay the attorney's fees for the plaintiffs who were trying to support a decent recovery, and to pay the Attorney General and his staff for trying to defend an indefensible statute. If elected as your Attorney General, I'm not going to be spending my time defending half-assed unconstitutional statutes. We've got a lot to do in this state. That's not one of them. I would want to establish a Consumer Protection Division in the Department of Justice. I would want to establish a Civil Rights Division in the Oregon Department of Justice, like we've had at the federal level since 1957. I'd want to support a drug enforcement division that understands that, by and large, the only victims of drugs are the people who take them, and we need not to lock everybody and his uncle up, but to find ways to solve the problem. I would be embarrassed at this time to be an Oregon citizen when you realize that of the 50 states and the District of Columbia, we're in the top three. We're the top third, top three. 1, 2, 3. We spend more money in this state than any other state in the Union, with the exception of 2, locking people up. I thought when you got west of the Rockies and west of the Cascades that the air was good enough, that you'd have better sense. Well, we got the Oregonian and all sorts of people who are in favor of locking everyone up, and that's sad. What about expenditures on education, K-12, and college? We rank down in the top of the bottom third. We're at 35. Everybody and his uncle, probably Mississippi and South Dakota and Little Rhode Island, they all spend more money per capita than we do here in Oregon. Maybe the people in the legislature think that the Oregon air and the Oregon water is so good that they don't have to spend money on education. But I think we do. One other area that is of special concern to me, of course, is health. When there was an introduction about former Prime Minister Churchill fighting universal health care in 1945, we could have added that it was the Democratic Socialist in the British Labour Party, led by Clement Attlee, that beat Churchill and sent him back to his castle. It was a Baptist minister who was the Democratic Socialist premier of Saskatchewan, who came up with a single-payer plan in Canada, which we need in this state. And we should all remember, when we go to vote, that Obama lied when he said he's never supported single-payer. At one time he did briefly, but then when he got called on it in this election, he said and lied, no, I've never supported it. And he doesn't support health care for the children of undocumented workers. And he has a whole series of lousy votes, the most recent of which, of course, was the vote not to permit bankruptcy judges the power to renegotiate the debt on failed mortgages. I do have a whole series of observations here about war, and I'll not go through that unless I'm called. But there was an article in this morning's Oregonian that said the reason why the current administration has doubled the national debt from $5 to $10 million is that the current administration has been losing revenue on stupid tax bills and has been losing revenue fighting a senseless war in Iraq. It's right in there. 30 seconds to read it. Oregonian, October the 10th, page 812. You don't have to be bright to understand this, and we're all bright here, or we wouldn't be here. 8 years of war. Lost tax cuts. In other words, 8 years of war, tax cuts, and now a faltering economy has doubled the national debt to $10 million. Well, fortunately or unfortunately, Congress is trying to bail out the capitalist banks. It's more what you would call socialism for the rich and capitalism for the poor. The guy down the street selling apples or peanuts is not going to get bailed out. But maybe these banks are too big to bust. I don't really believe that. War is expensive. War is expensive. The highest suicide rate of any group in our public are the veterans. They bloat the hospital on the hill. They cost because of other health problems. The value of the dollar has gone down because of war, and the cost of oil has gone up because oil is priced and pegged at the dollar. If it weren't for the fact that millions and millions of people all over the world were dying, I might not be here. I'd be maybe some other argument. But one last point. If you dare to remain a Democrat or vote a Democrat in this election, remember that the Democratic administration and previously the Ford administration sent millions of dollars to Indonesia to kill 200,000 people in that little tiny country, 1/10 of the population. And I've got a handout here. It cost me $1 a piece, and it's written by the 1996 Nobel Peace Prize winner, the president of East Timor, who basically said it was American arms supplied by the Democrats and Republicans that killed not only his sister and 2 brothers, but another 200,000 people in East Timor. The Republicans and the Democrats are the war party. The Socialists and the Greens are the peace parties. And when you vote, don't forget that. Thank you for your time.
Next up is Chris Eckstein, who's a high school math teacher here in the Portland area, Portland School District, and also taught in New York City schools. And he graduated from Willamette University in Salem, Oregon, and Pace University with a Bachelor's of Science in Teaching. Chris Eckstein, House District 42, Oregon State House.
Thank you. Very proud to be representing the Green Party in this upcoming election. I just want to say a few things about what distinguishes the Green Party from the Democrats. First of all, we stand first and foremost for peace. Now, as a state candidate, I pledge to do everything that we can in the state of Oregon to move for peace. The problems associated with poverty, poor health care are we see the symptoms of that. We need to improve funding for public education. We must reduce class sizes. At my current job, I have 40 students in one geometry class. That should be illegal. We cannot fall in the trap of relying on rigid standardized testing. And we must expand our funding of post-secondary education to include free college education for all students. In Portland, I think we set a good example for the use of alternate transportation. In the state legislature, I would be a strong advocate for cycling, buses, and light rail. And I would also do my best to advocate and set an example for all the other cities in Oregon to follow suit. We must reform our drug policy. As Walt Brown did a good job of explaining, it's wrong for us to have so many incarcerated in prison. We should legalize marijuana use for adults and purge prisons for people that are in there for non-violent drug offenses. We must protect the environment. Again, we are a strong opponent of all pipelines, liquid natural gas, and we are the party that will stand up to those that will try to harm the environment. Now, I'd like to say just a few more things about what separates us from the Democrats. And the main thing in the state of Oregon that at the local level that separates us from the Democrats is our support of democracy. We're in favor of instant runoff voting. Democrats are strongly opposed to this. We're in favor of elections that do not require a lot of money. Democrats are strongly opposed to this. It should not cost any money to stand up for what you believe in. So, voting Democrat is a vote for free elections. They have a monopoly on power, and they're doing their best to make sure that nobody else is allowed to share in that. That is wrong, and we must stand up for that. Just one more thing I'd like to say is back to Britain. I had the pleasure of being at a peace conference in Switzerland, and one of the great individuals that was there was a member of parliament from Britain by the name of Claire Short. She's a lifelong member of the Labour Party, and at the time of the invasion of Iraq, she was a member of the British cabinet. And it was interesting because she was probably the most passionate and outspoken critic of U.S. and British foreign policy that has gotten us into these awful wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And it was really sad that she had spent a lifetime, very passionate, talented career working for the Labour Party, and she found herself on the wrong side of the most important conflict that she had come across in her political career. And that's something that I fear for all the people that are rising up in the Democratic Party. They do have talented people up there, but they find themselves on the wrong side of things, and the Green Party will never be on the wrong side of important conflicts. So please vote Green, register Green, and turn out for the election. Thanks a lot.
That was Chris Eckstein, 42nd District, Oregon State House. That's inner southeast Portland if you don't have all the numbers memorized. Next up is one of our nonpartisan candidates, although he is a registered Pacific Green, James Nicita. is an attorney in Oregon City. He is part of a legal team that won a remand at Coos County's approval of an LNG terminal on Coos Bay. And he's running for City Commission of Oregon City. Jim Nicita.
Boy, I think the temperature's dropped about 10 degrees since I've been here. I hope you're all standing up, keeping warm. Nice to see a good crowd here. How are you?
Hi.
Good to see you. But I'm glad. Since I'm a local candidate, I want to talk about local politics, which I think is really significant to maintain a healthy democracy. And I want to tell you about a little strategy that we are working on in the Pacific Green Party that relates this election to upcoming local elections. One of the things that I was working on this year was recruiting candidates for offices all over the state of Oregon. And I learned some really striking things that both worry me and inspire me to work harder in politics. One of the things I learned, for example, is that across the state of Oregon this year, in our state house and state senate races, approximately a little under half of all of the districts in Oregon for both state senator and state representative were non-competitive between the major parties. So you had almost half of the seats in the state legislature with a Republican running against no Democrat, or a Democrat running against no Republican. Take a minute to mull that over, what consequences that has for our democracy. We don't have any debate. We don't have the exchange of ideas that's so necessary to come up with solutions to the pressing problems of the day. We're hoping to build the Pacific Green Party to offer folks a solution and a choice throughout the state of Oregon in future elections. 2 years is not a lot of time to start planning for the next election in 2010. And we'll be planning for that as soon as this election ends. But even near term than that, I want to let you know that right around the corner after the first of the year, all across the state, there will be elections for local offices that are really significant but undervalued. These seats range from your local fire district board, your local water district board, your local school district board. And these districts also not only sometimes go without a competitive race, they often have no race. In other words, no candidates run for these offices at all. That's a problem for self-government and a functioning democracy. So as soon as this election is over, we are going to be turning our focus right away to all of the local offices throughout Oregon that we can find good candidates for. And I want to encourage everybody in this crowd to think about your role as a citizen and think about running for local office yourself. People need to develop political skills. They need to learn how government works. They need to figure out how to finance a project, to deal with public employees, to deal with budgets, to have interpersonal skills sitting on a board or council and how democracy works that way. And there's no better place to learn than in the crucible of a small local governmental board, commission, or district. From there you can learn the skills to take the next step up to higher office. Jimmy Carter, President Jimmy Carter, started out as a school board member, for example. And I want to encourage everybody here, and who will watch this on video, to have that aspiration to serve your fellow citizens, learn and become a more sophisticated voter and leader, and find find your own voice because you have something to contribute. And through that gradual development of experience, I'm hoping the Pacific Green Party, as time goes by, will have a much larger critical mass of talented candidates and experienced public office holders to offer the voters in future elections a choice. And as this current crisis, the economic system, shows us, we really need that. This economic crisis is deep, it's threatening, but we are forced into this really tiny choice between two parties as to how to find a solution to that. And I'm encouraging you all to help build a multi-party democracy, not just a two-party, as Ralph Nader calls it, duopoly. We need to have more parties, strong parties, diverse opinions, diverse sets of solutions. I encourage you all to take the initiative and see what other candidates for president have to say about this economic crisis and share that with folks, because we need a broader spectrum of opinion on how to solve these problems than the political parties and the press are giving us. So we have to take things into our own hands and build that wider spectrum of parties and that more sophisticated multi-party democracy. So I encourage you all to take part in that great adventure. Thanks.
That was Jim Nocita, candidate for City Commission of Oregon City. And next up is myself. I'm the secretary of the Pacific Green Party and on the coordinating committee. And in the Portland Metro chapter, we meet at the Bipartisan Cafe at 7901 Stark in Southeast Portland every Thursday at 6:30 p.m. if you're interested. And I'm running for Secretary of State. That's the office immediately below the governor. We don't have a lieutenant governor. And it's mainly in charge of auditing, filings, and most importantly, elections. And it also sits on one of the three people on the land board, which administers the Common Schools Fund. I'm running for the office of Secretary of State because I believe I can perform the duties of the office more effectively and more fairly than either of my opponents. First, both major party candidates have sold out to special interests. My Democratic opponent, Kate Brown, has raised nearly $1 million with large checks coming from PACs, both from DC-based lobbyist groups and from state-level lobbyist organizations, primarily large unions. My Republican opponent has also raised a substantial amount of money from the timber and trucking industries. Their interest is mainly with the state land board. I, on the other hand, have taken no money. Money is the source of corruption in politics. My reason for running is to provide a voice to the voiceless, those without large sums of money. It's my solemn belief and principle that money is not democracy. Taking large political donations is in effect legalized bribery. I aim to end that. To that end, when I'm elected, I promise real campaign finance reform by enforcing legislation Oregonians already enacted directly in 2006 when Measure 47 passed. Democratic Secretary Bradbury refuses to enforce the law. My Democratic opponent will say she's for campaign finance reform, but make no mistake, if it doesn't please her big money backers, don't get your hopes up. Another point of difference I have with my opponents is that I believe in a strong, healthy, and multi-party democracy. 100 years ago, the citizens of Oregon voted to allow ranking candidates in order of preference when voting. The current Democratic Secretary successfully lobbied against both state and local legislation that would enable this constitutional provision, preventing people from voting for somebody other than the lesser of two evils. Instant runoff voting would ensure that if no candidate receives a majority of first-choice votes, a runoff election is held instantaneously, taking into account voters' second-choice votes. Why is this important? Without ensuring a majority, the two major parties maintain a monopoly on elections. Any third-party challenger risks being seen as the candidate that took votes that were somehow owned by one of the other major parties. It forces voters to vote for the lesser of two evils in order to prevent the worst evil from getting elected. It's a travesty that both major parties refuse to require a majority of votes for elected candidates, which can be done cheaply by allowing voters to express their first, second, and third choices for each race. Another issue that will come up in this decennial census in 2 years is the redistricting process. Oregon's legislative borders will have to be moved to account for changing population. I write the engine software used by the first versions of Google Maps. I'll use my expertise as a map data software engineer to implement the rules of ORS 188.010 in software for anybody to see to draw the boundaries in a fair way. All of Benton County's major cities are cut between districts 4 and 5, for example. Such senseless boundaries can be eliminated by software. With my expertise in making software and hardware devices, I also know the danger of trade secret software and hardware counting our votes. Our democracy shall never be subject to ridiculous claims of trade secret by large corporations who want to run our elections. I would mandate that any software used by Oregon be made fully open and auditable by any member of the public without a non-disclosure agreement. Democracy must be open and not closed. Furthermore, I would increase the statistical sampling requirements depending on how close the election is to ensure a 99% confidence in the results of the computer tally of our paper mail-in ballots. Currently, our standards are much lower, even after a recent bill raised them slightly. The Democrats, influenced by large unions, not only oppose campaign finance reform, they also oppose our initiative system, Oregon's form of direct democracy. Rather than continue to eat away at our right to circumvent the legislature when it fails to act, I would first ban all paid signature gathering as much as I could to ensure they are all volunteers. At the same time, I would reduce the signature requirements and place all initiatives in a primary ballot. There would be a lot more initiatives, but only those that won the primary would be promoted to the general election. That would solve the issue of out-of-state money influencing our initiative process while at the same time preserving it as a powerful instrument of Oregon's democracy. And I want to bring up another critical point. Ballot measures. The initiatives that are on the ballot right now. Generally, when you look at the ballot measures, you want to look at ballot measure 57 and anything with a smaller number than that, you can vote yes on it. Anything with a larger number than that, you want to vote no on it. 57 itself, you may or may not want to vote for it, but generally, we would prefer you not. But in the case if Measure 61 looks like it's going to pass with more votes than 57, you might want to vote for 57 to push it over the top of 61. And thus that one would be enacted. That's the Kevin Mannix one, which would put more and more people in prison, is 61. And 57 is the legislature's proposal to counteract that somewhat, but not completely. And one of the most important ballot measures is ballot measure 65. And what ballot measure 65 would do is it would change our primary and general election system radically to reinforce the two-party system. And what it does and how it does that is it essentially eliminates party primaries. Party primaries were put into place as a progressive measure to ensure that party endorsements and nominations couldn't happen in smoke-filled back rooms. And what they would do is they would eliminate that, but allow the parties to endorse back in those back and put